Namaste.
Namaste.
Sir, this land of ours has been a great fascination over the millennia. And recently I read a commentary on Bhagavad Gita, wherein in the second chapter, Krishna says, Yoga is efficiency or dexterity in action. The author writes there, nowhere in this world we find such a definition of spirituality wherein spirituality is defined as efficiency in action. Here, efficiency in action takes two dimensions. The one is the coherence that we follow in work. The second dimension is the spiritual dimension, where efficiency in work becomes the school of our inner development. For any development to take place, these two efficiencies of work must go hand in hand. And he adds to it, only because our country followed these two, we were able to prosper in the past. But somewhere in the middle, we stopped practicing it in our day-to-day life. So today we find number of problems around us. Are these issues the result of our ignorance at present of our great teachings, the great treasure of ideas that we inherited from our ancestors? So, would you please comment on that?
Good question. I'm glad you brought up this question first up.
Very nice.
Very nice. And see, we should understand the word yoga first of all. Today, yoga is limitedly understood as yogasana. Asana is all about postures, but yoga goes beyond that. Of course, Krishna himself is known as Yogeshwara in Bhagavad Gita, obviously, and at least 2 millennia before Krishna, in Ramayana, the guru of Rama, Vasishta, he has written Yoga Vasishta. So, those yoga goes much before that and goes on from there even before that to Patanjali and thereon. So, it's got a very hoary, long, illustrious timeline of yoga with us in this land. This land is a land of yoga. But what is the meaning of the word yoga is what we should try to understand. When you say this efficiency, when you bring all those words, the word yoga comes from the word yuj, which she'll explain to you so nicely.
See, the word yuj, these are the roots for the word yoga, and they mean union. Okay, so a union and alignment, more than union also, it's an alignment. Union is a form of alignment. So aligning is what is yoga. So if we look at the yoga that we do as practice, we align our body, we align our muscles, our action, our limbs, then our breath, our mind, all of this we align. So that is why it is called yoga. So the very word yoga means alignment. And you know where you can beautifully see this? Have you heard the word yoke in English? And have you seen a yoke where it is used? It is typically used on bullocks. When you have two bullocks that are going to draw a cart, then you put a yoke on them so that they both will run at the same speed. Otherwise, one will go ahead, one will lag behind, then it's going to be very difficult to drive the cart. So they put a yoke on them so that you can align them. So yoga, that is how you see the word yoke comes from the same root, yug.
The English word yoke comes from our Indian word yog. That's the English word join. Now, y and j is used in English.
In German, if you see, they will write J but then pronounce it as Y. So J and Y have a similar sound. So the word for join also is similar to join, to align. Okay, so yoga means to align. Yug is to align. Even yug in time scale, yuga, we say Kali Yuga, Dwapara Yuga. So the word yuga there means that alignment of any bodies, two bodies and more. 2 or 3, at minimum you need 2 bodies for an alignment. So that is called a yuga. So every year when the earth and the sun come in alignment with a particular zodiac, that means you've completed 1 year, right? The earth is going around, coming in front of the sun, and the same zodiac means you've done 1 year.
Yes.
That is why the Telugu people, when they
Kannada.
celebrate Telugu, Kannada,
New Year.
and their new year, they call it Yugadi, means starting of a yuga.
Yuga Adi, Yugadi. So Yuga, Yoga, all that is coming together. So in yoga, it is body, breath, mind coming together. So when all three get in alignment, then you get all the powers that you have to one focused area. So when you get the body and your breath and your mind to one focus, then whatever act you do will not only be efficient but also be effective. Krishna as Yogeshwara exemplified this. So when we talk about Yoga Day, International Yoga Day, June 21st, the idea is not just to do asana. It is to bring the body, the breath, mind, all that together. So all the actions of ours are in alignment, in synchronization. So if you are going to bring this together, then everything that you will be effective in synchronization. If you are not able to bring it in synchronization, it will all sync. Not SYNC, but SINK, as you say in English. So it's very important to have yoga in all your acts.
See, what is efficiency? When you say efficiency, it means that with as little effort, you are able to achieve the maximum. Now, when can you achieve that? When you don't have any hurdles, when you don't have any obstacles, no hindrances, and everything is smooth. Now, when will everything be smooth? When everything is going along the same line, same pace, they're all aligned. If they are not aligned, then you will see friction. And if they are extremely opposite, then you are going to find hurdles.
Opposition then.
Opposition. So when you are in alignment, when you are in conjunction, when you are in convergence, that is when with the lowest effort you can achieve the maximum.
So
And that is what is efficiency. So your thoughts are aligned, your actions are aligned. So what you're doing is the same as what you're thinking. And what you're doing is the same that is needed to be done. That is expected, that is needed for that situation. That is when you will achieve an efficiency.
So when you do that like that, the one more thing what you need apart from yoga, you need skill. What is the other word you use for skill for that? Because you must be skilled to do it. You brought your body, breath, mind, thought, everything together. Then to do an act, you need skill.
And
That's
what,
English word.
And you used the right word. You said dexterity, right?
Yes.
Where does this word dexterity come from? You will see a beautiful connect. Just like you saw the word connect between yoga and yoke and join and yuga. You will see a beautiful connect between dexterity and the word daksha. The word for dexterity in Indian languages is daksha.
And Daksha is a Prajapati. Who is a Prajapati? Praja means people. Pati is one who is a leader. So he is a leader of the people. So what? He gave the skills to do your acts as people, because you have to be skilled to do everything. Today you speak about skill development. In India, in New India, talk about skill development. So you know the essential, how important skills are. So through the times, through millennia ago, so even then they knew the importance of skills. That is why they said Daksha Prajapati, who is the man who gave the humankind, the mankind, the skills they have needed to lead a good, capable, practical, effective, efficient life. So you have Daksha for skills. So Daksha. And who is the daughter of Daksha?
Daksha.
Dakshayani. Okay, and who is Dakshayani?
Goddess Parvati.
Parvati. Devi Parvati is Dakshayani. And who is her husband? Shiva. And so Daksha is the father-in-law of Shiva. So you see the so for life, what do you need to? So Shiva is all about life. Shiva means life. What is the opposite of life? Death. What do you call death?
A dead body. Shava.
Shava. That's why you call a coffin as a Shavapatti. when you're in asana, when you're lying down in asana without motion, without movement, what do you call that asana?
Savasana.
Shavasana. So opposite. So Shiva is life. Shava is death.
So
non-life.
actually people often say Shiva is the most terrible, fierce god who kills and who destroys. No, Shiva is life. Shiva is auspiciousness. Life means auspiciousness. And what is auspiciousness? It means that it is something that can happen, that can become. Because Shiva denotes that which can happen, that which can manifest. So he is life, and for life to exist, to be, you need some amount of skill, right? You need to be able to grow your food, eat your food, make your own
Clothes.
shelter, all of that. So everything is a skill.
Roti, kapada, makan. Yeah, what you call about basic food, clothes, shelter, as you say in English. நம்ம தமிழ் சொல்லணும் உணவு, உடை, ஆடை, இருக்கும் இல்லம். All this you need skills. So look at so there's an intrinsic connect between Shiva life and Daksha skills. So these two are again those alignment. They are brought together in alignment. That's why you have efficiency of life. See how our Indian legends bring these out so beautifully for us to realize, relish, understand and live this life with yoga, with Daksha skills, so that we can go forward in this life in a happening way, full of life.
Yes. So, sir, as you said, Indian legends taught us practical ways of life. So, the more we are connected to our roots, the more we flourish. So, now with the growth of modern positive psychology, psychologists have identified 3 aspects of happiness. They say happiness is divided into pleasure, engagement, and meaning. As we all know, the pleasure is the one which gives us the momentary happiness. When we engage ourselves in some work, we get much more satisfaction. And the final meaning, when in the work that we do, if we find a purpose or some righteous reason behind it, our happiness is maximized. So this is what their theory is. In our tradition, they say our lives are guided by the 4 Purusharthas, which we call Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. When we look at the Kama, Artha and Dharma, it closely resembles the pleasure, engagement and meaning. So now with all these modern techniques, they code such theories. But our rishis, they just abandoned everything. They retired to the forest. They studied themselves and with simple tools of nature, they were able to realize such great truths. They were able to realize the ultimate reality behind everything. So they called it as the ultimate Ananda or Sachidananda, which is the utmost happiness. So, what do you think about this?
You have covered quite a few points in this, one by one. You said simple tools our ancients used in it. You are talking about here aspects that relate to our body, our inner self and mind. There is no modern tool for understanding the mind and the inner working. It is still, you see it only the inner self you can find out. So the tool is the strongest tool we always have had. That's the strength of our civilization, having this tool to study our inner self. And use the word Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. All of us want to go towards moksha. And there are 3 steps to it, Dharma, Artha, Kama. On Dharma, people say righteousness, good, all those things. But there's a more fundamental factor to Dharma. That is, she'll explain to you in a minute. It's all about character. What is Dharma? She'll explain.
See, it comes, you look at the word Dharma, it comes from the root dhar, dha, dhar, to bear. Okay, and what do we bear? What is the basic thing that we bear? Our character. There is no way you can separate that out. You can take out your possessions, you can take out your clothes, you can take out all your wealth, anything. But can you take out your character and your trait? That's inseparable from you, right? So that dharma and that character and trait is there for everything that exists, living and non-living. So even sun is said to have a dharma. A dharma, what is sun's dharma? to be lustrous, to radiate light, to shine, to generate heat, and to sustain life. So even the sun has a dharma, and the dharma of sun, the nature, the very nature. So dharma actually means the nature of everything to have a nature. Its own nature is dharma. So as a human you have a dharma, as an animal you have a dharma, a plant has its dharma, even sun has its dharma, earth has its dharma. Earth's dharma is to keep rotating, otherwise there will be no day, no night. The whole thing goes awry.
So the dharma of the earth is to have gravity and hold all the earthlings on it, both animate and inanimate, and to rotate and revolve
Around the sun.
around the sun. Apata, that's the dharma. What's the dharma of the sun? To have gravity to hold the sun and all the planets of the solar system, which we call the Surya Malika, because it's Mala around the sun. The Surya Malika, all the solar system together, and to radiate and give light and heat. That's the dharma of the sun. What's the dharma of a lion? To keep the forest clean, to kill and eat all the things. So that's the dharma of the lion. So everybody has a dharma. Every plant, your vegetables have a dharma. You have a dharma. So everything has a dharma. So that is to live as per your character is dharma. So if you go outside your character and live, that is adharmic. So innateness comes from that. And that when you live with dharma, you have desires. You want to eat food. You want to wear good clothes. You want to procreate. Everything is a
Because
dharma.
that is also part of nature. It's a nature of any living being. See, even plants have a desire. They desire light. They go seeking the sunlight. You find, right, the creepers, they will move, and then they will, even trees, they'll grow towards light. So they also have a desire. So everything, if you didn't have a desire, you would not live. Why do you breathe? Because you want to live.
So that's a desire.
You don't realize it, but every breath you take is a desire to live.
That is why in Kanchipuram, the Devi, presiding Devi of Kanchipuram is known as Kamakshi. Akshi means I. Kama means desires, not just desire, anything that you want. So you have to have wants to live in life.
Otherwise, you will never act. If there is no desire, you will never do anything.
Why don't you get up in the bed in the morning if there's no work to do? You don't want to brush your teeth.
If
you
there is
don't
no
want to-
hunger, you won't get up from bed, right?
So she guides you. That's why Kamakshi, she guides you in your desires of the day, of the week, of the month, of your life. That's the concept of Kama. So it is not just only carnal pleasures. It is every aspect of life is Kama.
And you also have the divinity Lakshmi, Lakshya. She comes from the word Lakshya, which means goal. So she sets the goal. So when you have a good goal, she sets good goals for you, and the goal is like your desire. So you have to achieve that goal, right? If you didn't have the goal to eat, to fulfill your hunger, you would not do anything at all. So each of these small, so Lakshmi is not just gold coins and wealth. Your goals in life is Lakshmi. She is the wealth, and to set the right goals in your life is the best Lakshmi.
So that's the point. Then for all this, what do you need? You need means. That's Artha. Artha is not just money. The means to do everything is Artha. That is why Chanakya in Artha Shastra has given a nice quotation on this. Dharmasya Artha Moolam. Like that. So for all this, you need to have the means, the wealth to do it. So it's set like that. So it's beautifully set. So that, and then when you have all this, you achieve every step of all these things. What do you achieve? Moksha.
See, people normally think moksha means liberation after death. The soul gets liberated and then goes. That is a level. See, moksha means, okay, liberation. But there is liberation at every level. A spiritual level liberation is there for the soul. Your physical level also, in your existence, you have to be liberated from various other things that hold you down. And when can that come? When you are contented. So contentment is very important, but that contentment has to be balanced with your karma as well. Because if you're only content and say, I'm fine, I don't want anything, then you're talking about those sannyasis who have lived their life and then renounce it, and renounce everything, and then say, now I'm done, I'm content, I'm done
Done
with
everything.
everything. But you can't say I'm contented right when you're born. So
There's so
you
many
have
things
to
to
do,
achieve.
because as a human in society, you also have your dharma to support the society. So you can't afford to be content, because to support society, you have to work. You have to generate wealth to keep the society alive.
For that, you have to study first. You have to educate yourself, get your skills first, be skilled, daksha, be educated, be a vidyarthi, learn vidya. Then, with that skills and that vidya, support society to do well, earn more artha. So it supports the society in a larger way than
In a
all.
sustainable manner.
So all the karma of it, all the good karma of everybody is fulfilled, because as the father of nation Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi says, Mahatma Gandhi says, there is enough for every man's need in this earth, but not for every man's greed. Isn't it?
Right.
Like that. So you should have enough, create enough artha for everybody to use and live a prosperous life, healthy life. So with goals, with reasonable goals, with sustainable goals, as she says, that's lakshya. When you have all this, then you obviously reach moksha. So these 3 steps to that. There's another way of looking at it. There are 5 sheets to us, what we call koshas. Annamaya kosha, Pranamaya kosha, Manamaya kosha, Vijnanamaya kosha, Anandamaya kosha. Ananda is bliss. So only when you go through the 5 levels, you get to Anandamaya kosha. So again you see, so here you have the 4 Purushata, there you have the 5 koshas. How it's all so beautifully intertwined.
And it is these 5 koshas, this idea is what had impressed one of the greatest leaders in human resources, Maslow. And he came up with his Maslow's laws of hierarchy. The needs, how the needs are hierarchical. And it is all these which eventually go to shape all these psychological needs, all of that.
What you speak about modern psychology is substantially expressed by Maslow. So Maslow is one of the forerunners of all the modern psychology, talking about Abraham Maslow. He was New York. He is born of Russian Jew parents who immigrated from Russia to Americas, and he used the same 5 levels what we speak about in Taittiriya Upanishad as Panchamaya Kosha. We've written about this in our book Indo-Russia, A Connect Over Millennia. We've written about this.
So when we look into the works of Bhaskaracharya, one of our greatest mathematician and astronomer, his work says Bhaskaracharya believed in anything only when there is a proof for it. He used a rigorous scientific reasoning for everything. And he has said, Rahu is not a demon. We believe Rahu is the one who swallows the moon. That's why we get the eclipse. He says, it's the earth's shadow which makes the moon invisible. If you want to believe in Rahu, tell that he entered the shadow of the moon and then he swallowed the earth. So, such kind of a pragmatic conclusion he had given years back, and all our great ancestors were such logical thinkers. Sir, on our part, how far have we realized and recognized all these great glories of our nation, and how are we doing that, sir?
Good point, priest. So I'll tell you to use the word demons. In our Indian thought, Indian civilization thought, our Hindu civilization thought, there's no word called demons. Demons is a very colonial word, it's an English word. Because that means demon means something bad. We don't have anything like demons at all. Everything is for us divine. There is no devil, there is no demon. Everything is only divine. Everything made in this universe is God created and everything is divine. That's a fundamental factor we need to understand.
Asura, Rakshasa, they're not demon. I mean, in English, they loosely translate it to demon. But Rakshasa is a separate race, Asura is a separate race. So they're all different groups of people, categories. They're not demons.
So that's first.
Because there have been people in Asuras who have been close to God, who have attained moksha.
Divinity. So that's not at all bad.
Similarly, in Rakshasa, that is a very black and white way of looking at things.
It's all very grey in our thought, and that's how it should be. That's how nature is. That's part of nature, Prakriti, nature. Now, having said that, Bhaskaracharya, who lived about 1000 years ago, he wrote 4 treatises in mathematics. In one of them, astronomy obviously speaks about this very clearly. So Bhaskaracharya was not the first person to speak about the shadow falling. Okay, it is there. The shadow falling is mentioned even in Mahabharata, which was written about 4000 years before Bhaskaracharya. The reason is, I'll tell you why. Eclipses were known. It was Rishi Atri who first speaks about eclipses in the times of Ramayana. Okay, there also eclipses have been observed in this land for 7000 years and mathematically calculated as when eclipses will occur. So if some snake is going to eat the moon, then you don't know when the snake will be hungry, when it will eat the moon. Whereas you know here mathematically when it will happen. So it is not there. But at the same time, there are the Indian legends. First of all, you should not use the word mythology. The word mythology is what some people wrongly attribute to Indian stories. They say because it comes from the word myth, which in turn comes from the Greek word mythos, which is similar to the Sanskrit Indian word mithya, meaning not true. Mythos also in Greek means not true. So they attribute everything in India to mythology and say not true. That's fundamentally wrong. What we should correctly call is Indian legends. Some of them are historical itihasa, some of them are allegorical to explain a story. So these are allegorical ways of explaining a story. While we know the mathematical precision when eclipses occur, very clearly, and it's called Saros cycle, which you've written about in our book. We'll show you all that. So it's called Saros cycle, 18-year cycle, how eclipses occur. We know it very clearly, and that's how it is. And Aryabhatta or Varahamihira or Bhaskaracharya, these are the first people to speak about eclipses. It's been done much before, as I told you. Millennia before them, we knew eclipses very well, and we knew the effects of eclipses also, which is called grahana. She'll explain to you what the word grahana is.
See, you asked like how can we believe that people knew about it? Very simple. In Indian thought, in every language, we have called eclipse as grahan, grahanam, right? The very word grahanam means, and also people normally say that Indians did not know anything about astronomy because they have called sun as a graha, which is a star. They have called moon, which is a satellite, as a graha. They've called planets as a graha. They've called nodes, Rahu and Ketu, which are just points in space. That is also called a graha because they're all part of the Navagraha. So Indians did not know astronomy. On the contrary,
that's a myth. It's not astronomy, it's a myth.
That is a myth. Not our legends are not myths. This is a myth because it's a wrong understanding.
That Indians did not know astronomy is a myth. But the fact is, she'll explain to you.
So, if you look at the word graha, graha means what? To take. To take, to occupy, right? To possess. That is why you call your house graha. Because out of this entire universe, in this earth, this part of land, this little piece of land, you have chosen to occupy as your home. So you're occupying this land. That is why it is your graha. This space you've occupied. So every planet, every body, celestial body, be it a star or a planet or a satellite, occupies some space. So that space is a graha. So when they refer...
That is why when you occupy your house for the first time, you call it graha pravesam. That is, your pravesam means enter. So you are entering your house, that's why it's graha pravesam. You got to occupy that space, that's why it's graha pravesam. And the lady of the house, what is she called? Grihini. That means she is the lady who is occupying that house. She is a grihini. So the word griha there means to occupy. And immediately you have somebody to sit down. What do they say? Asan grahan karna. Please take your seat. So please sit down there. So you occupy that space. So graha, as she says, as she explains so nicely.
So everything, a sun or a star or a planet, it occupies a space, which is why we called it a graha. So it is, we also have a word for star. So we have the word tara. So that, and we have a word for Rahu and Ketu. Also we have called it as graha because these are the points or the space that is occupied when they come to that node. When the sun and when the orbits are aligned, when they intersect in such a way that the sun and the moon are as you see from Earth. See, that's yet another thing. People normally say that Indian astronomy is geocentric, because everything we have said, the sun is moving in the sky, the moon is moving in the sky. But if you look at the Veda itself, you will find a lot of verses which talk about how the earth is going around the sun with the planet, with its satellite, the moon. So they're very clear, they knew that. But look at how advanced they were to be able to superimpose a heliocentric view onto a geocentric view and geocentric maths as well. So to be able to say that this heliocentric phenomena which is happening in the cosmos can be seen and expressed as this geocentric view of sun going around, the moon going around. So everything is going around the earth, and they have spoken about it in terms of the earth. So from that perspective, the points of intersection, again, which is a space, is called a graha.
So it's actually nodes. Actually, see, the sun and the moon actually don't cross path in reality. They only cross path in your perception from you sitting as an earthling and seeing it in the sky, in the amber, the sky that you see it. They intersect, their paths intersect. So those intersection 2 points, the northern intersection, southern intersection, are called graha, because they occupy a space, and it's not a stationary space. The earth is moving, the sun is moving, the moon is moving, that is also moving. So it's a space in moving space.
Yes.
That is the beauty of mathematics. So that is what Bhaskaracharya so beautifully explained when he speaks about Graha. And Graha has been discussed from ancient times onwards, about which we written a book called Triple Eclipse, so that you can see all that in that. So we'll share that copy with you for you to see.
So this itself is proof enough for people of today to understand, yes, we knew about eclipses besides all the verses. But the idea of the phenomenon of an eclipse, phenomenon of space, phenomenon of motion in universe was very beautifully understood by our ancestors and very beautifully therefore expressed.
So you had scientific detailings and you also had stories for the layman. So it is intertwining of both. You needed this and that.
Right.
So because if you're going to explain a scientific treatise to a person who is not interested in scientific knowledge, how do you pass on the knowledge to them? You tell them with nice stories.
Right.
So it is an intertwining of both. And you should understand that the civilization had a maturity to intertwine both very well. That is how knowledge also keeps coming across generations. Scientific formula don't go on beyond classrooms and beyond academic papers.
Right.
So you need both. Okay. Next.
Sir, we find a mention of great physicians in our Vedic literature on also the texts which have come after that. They were pioneers in their field. How far we were successful in the field of medical science during our ancient times?
Use the word, see, medicine, what did we call it? Ayurveda. The word Veda comes from the root word Vid, means knowledge, Vidya. It is from that word Vidya, you get the English word wit and wisdom. So somebody is knowledgeable, you call it wit. It's a sharp wit, especially in English language, you use the word sharp wit. The word wit itself comes from the Indian word Vid, which comes from Veda, Vidya, knowledge. So Ayur is life. Ayur is life. So the knowledge about life is Ayurveda. That's what. And use the word physician. Among all the physicians, which is the foremost of the physicians in Ayurveda? Charaka. What does the word Charaka mean? One who walks. Chalna.
Charam means to walk. Right? So our concept of keeping, see, there is a difference, okay, in how we look at medicine today and how this civilization has practiced medicine. So this civilization, the fundamental idea was to prevent diseases. Whereas today, the fundamental idea of medicine is to treat the disease. The focus, I mean, there are both. Even today, you have preventive, you have
Curative.
curative.
There are two types it's called. Preventive is called Swastha Vrita. Swastha, health, Swastha Vrita is preventive. Atura Vrita is curative. You
So
need
how
both.
to stay healthy? So Swastha Vrita is prevent diseases and stay healthy. Atura Vrita is If the disease comes, you have to treat it. So that is Atura Vritta. Both have exist then and both exist now. But the focus then
In Ayurveda.
in Ayurveda was, and even today, is to keep oneself healthy by preventing diseases. And there, how do you do that? Through your diet, through your lifestyle, through various things. And therefore, in fact, even vaccines was a way, and we had vaccines. We have written extensively about it in our book Staying Alive, how we have given vaccines to the world. Many from a long time we've been practicing, and when the English British came here, how they took this idea, that's a different story.
About
But-
Edward Jenner, whom you normally think for inoculation, much before that we had that. The word vaccination comes from the word vaka, means VACC. Vaka means cow in Greek. That's where vaccination comes. But actually we had practiced this as Vasuri and Go Vasuri. Smallpox, Go Vasuri is cowpox. So we practice it for millennia. We practice it. It's written in our book Staying Alive, India. It's a full few chapters on this which you can read.
So prevention was there, but how did they ensure that people practiced it? So what they would do is they had physicians who would keep going from town to town. I mean, village to village, through the forest. So
Through the land, all through the land. So there are hundreds and thousands and lakhs of charakas walking all over the land, collecting herbs and plants from the forests and the meadows and everywhere, and treating people with it, knowing which will treat whom. So you had so many charakas crisscrossing and talking to each other about medicine, advancement and all those things.
they would have conferences. They would go from village to village, educating people about all this,
Good
and
practices.
periodically going, giving them the necessary vaccinations, and educating them about what kind of food to take, what kind of, in which season you should do what. So all of this was done by, so they were not sitting in a clinic, in a dispensary in one place. They would keep moving, and they spread the knowledge of Ayurveda, and it got integrated into lifestyle of the people.
So they were dietitians, they were people who taught you good health, they were family health workers, they were also physicians. So that was Charaka. The tradition of Charaka was there for thousands of years. And one of the best paintings about Charaka was actually made by a Russian, which is now there in the Varanasi Banaras Hindu University. It's there.
Rorik. Rorik is the painter.
Painter.
So he has painted about this Charaka coming down the hills of Himalaya collecting herbs. So these were the people, and all of them, their collective knowledge is what is called the Charaka Samhita. So what we today refer to as the compendium for physicians, for medicine. Like that, you also had people who were who could treat through surgery and treat ailments through actually physical means like surgeries and so on. They were called Sushruta. I mean, there was one of the foremost is called Sushruta. So he has come up with his own work called Sushruta Samhita on how to do certain surgeries. And there used to be formal ways in which people would be trained to do surgeries. So you had surgeons, you had physicians, you also had people who would treat with words, like counselors, psychiatrists, so
So they
like
were
medicine men and all that they were
So
called.
there were people like the holy men who give you comforting words, all those things. So in all three varieties. What you today call as psychiatrists, psychologists, etc. So these are holy men, the divine people who went around talking to people about good things, about good values of life, etc. So we have a holistic system. That is Ayurveda.
As Swami Vivekananda said, the more the Hindus read their past, the more glorious will be their future. And the one who tries to bring the past to the doorstep of all the people, he is the greatest benefactor of the nation. Sir and ma'am, as a student, I have seen the people of my age being carried away by the Western culture. But amidst this, I can see a spark in some of my friends who say again and again we have to do something for the country. They have developed a will to do something that will transform the way of living in our country and the way we see things. So as today's youngsters, how do we equip ourselves for such a revolutionary thing to happen? How do we develop that knowledge, wisdom, and the charm of character that is needed for that?
Good point you raised here. It is the same thought that has urged the both of us over the last 20-25 years in understanding this knowledge of the civilization and sharing it with the youth, which is why we came up with Bharat Gyan. That's the whole purpose of what we are doing, and inspired by noble sons of Ma Bharati like Swami Vivekananda, so many more have tread this path, and we would also be happy to walk in those illustrious footsteps of first assimilating this knowledge, collating it in a modern way that the present youth will understand, and sharing it to them in the way they will relish it. That's what we're doing in Bharat Gyan is concerned. And it is very important to understand our present, our past, to help us for the future, which is what the focus of what we're doing also. I will take a quote here by a Westerner, George Orwell, a very famous author. So we have this famous quote of George Orwell, who says, "Those who control the present control the past. Those who control the past control the future." So he's talking about control, which is what is actually happening now. But he said this 50-60 years ago. Look at the beauty of this Dirghadasi. He had the foresight to see it. He said this. So when you are talking about the present, you must also know how to talk about the past, because you are coming from your past. You are coming from your parents, who are coming from their parents, So you are a seed of them. And
But at the same time, it is what you say that makes up the past. So you better say the correct thing about your past. That is why he says those who control the present control the past. So what you say becomes the past. So it is our job, therefore, today to ensure that we can dig up the right information about the past and make it known. Right?
That's very important, because if you learn physics, you learn chemistry, you learn biology, all these are subjects. Geography, you learn, these are subjects you learn. Whereas if you learn history, it's a mind bender. It shapes your mind to think whether you're a winner or a loser. What were your ancestors? They were winners or losers? What are their achievements? Like you spoke about Varahamihira or Bhaskaracharya or anybody, or Galileo, all those things. So learning about that sets your mind as to how to believe, how to behave, how to act in situations. So history is a mind bender subject. No other subject that you study in school is a mind bender the way history is. So that's why Swami Vivekananda so rightly said, you must learn about your where you came from to know where you're going to go. Because when you're driving a car, you need to look in the front, obviously, but you also need to have a rear view mirror to look in the back. Whether be it a car or a two-wheeler, whatever it is, you need a rear view mirror to know what is coming along. So that is important. Like that, you are building yourself up. So when you build yourself up based on the foundation, you need a foundation for a house to stand. This house will not stand without a foundation. So your forefathers, your ancestors, their achievements, their deeds, which build your character, are the foundation of your life and the life of your children and your grandchildren. So it's absolutely essential. That is why what we are doing in Bharat Gyan is, we are saying it is dare and confidence. You will be able to dare only if you are confident. So you must have confidence in yourself. If you are not confident about your own present, you are not confident about your past, how will you be able to dare and do things in life? You must have dare and confidence. Very important for civilization to march forward. Especially today when we talk about New India. So you need to have these two factors, which is what one of the goals of Bharat Gyan is.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, madam. So I have got so many inputs from you. I'll assure that we'll develop ourselves as today's young generation. We'll realize our greatness and we'll make others realize the same. And thank you for it.
Thank you so much. We really appreciated the kind of questions you asked. We really liked it. It's very nice. Nice to see youngsters such as yourself coming up with these questions and articulating it so beautifully. Very happy. Do it. Thank you.
Surely best of you. it.